All right, today I'm going to do a book review of a book I read. I'm still kind of trying to find the direction of where this channel will go, but I figured I read a lot and I want to cultivate sort of a life of distraction-free living, intentional living, high-quality leisure. And if you found it here, sounds like you might have some interest in that area. One of the high quality leisure things that I do is I like to read a lot, and today what I've done is when I read, I usually take notes. I dog-ear the pages, and then I saw from another person's YouTube video, I think her name is Petya Grady, where she writes a 3 to 5 page sort of a reflection on the book, and I thought that was a great idea because something to go back to and refer to. So what I've kind of done is I'll talk about what I thought of the book, and I'll go through some of the reflections that I had as I was reading the book and the notes kind of that I wrote. In no way is this sort of a summary of the book. I'm not trying to summarize this for you. What I want for you is that you go find this book and read it if this seems of any interest to you. So this is anything, if anything, this is to get you interested in the book. And the other is this is kind of me sharing the reflections I've had, and in that way sort of encouraging you to do a sort of a high focus work like reading a book, and then another sort of a high focus kind of high quality work of reading or writing what you thought of the book, what thoughts came up for you as you were writing the book. So your realizations, your insights, I'm kind of hoping you see me do it so you can encourage you to do it, do the same. So this is a book called Indistractable by Eyal. I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right. I hope I'm not too far off the pronunciation. And Julie Lee, so it's there's two authors. And I think, I started with figuring out why I even picked up this book. This has been sitting in my to-read pile for probably a year. I think I bought this in July of 2024, and this is May of 25 is when I'm doing this video. And what I have here behind me is the piles of books that are stacked on top and the bottom of this shelf those are books I am yet to read, and then all the books up in the bookshelf are books that I have read. So this kind of sat in that pile for almost a year, and I was trying to figure out why I even bought this book. So that's something that I don't do a very good job remembering who introduced me to the book, why I thought about buying this book, what led me to it, where did I read about it. So I'm hoping to do a better job with that as I go on, because it's kind of nice to find those little breadcrumbs, right? So what led to a book that you really liked and that made a big impact on you. So anyways, I think I bought this book in July because I was really into photography back then, really street photography. I've done photography in the past, and I was kind of getting back to it, and I was thinking of doing street photography. And in the process of getting back into it, I was also getting very distracted by a lot of the videos, the teachings, all those things that kind of happen as you're kind of getting back into a hobby that are more prevalent in my life. And I was starting to get to a point in July where I thought, well, what I need is to really do the hobby more and read about it, watch videos about it less. And that is probably when I read about this book in a newsletter, and I said, you know what, that's probably something I need, and I bought it. And then since July, I had a lot of family things happen, so I never got around to reading the book. So I think that's why I bought it, which is a good enough reason to have bought it and start to read it. Okay, so I read it. Maybe if there's any interest, I'd love to talk about how I read and review the books, but really all I've written here is the date I bought it, and when I started reading it, when I finished reading it, and where my notes are, which is in this book, which is I call this log. This is the 11th log book that I have. So without further ado, I'm going to put this aside and go through my review. So I wrote this on the 27th of April, and as I was reading this, okay, so here's some more. I wrote, when I leafed through the pages, I remember assuming the book was shallow and imagining it had easy fixes that could not work in the long term, right? Because just the way it was the way it was written is that it was short chapters, bullet points, summary, bullet points in the end, some bolded, letters. They didn't feel very academic, so it felt like it was far too easy to digest. And what I realize is that it is easy to digest because it is written for people who are distracted, and it is actually very, very nice that they wrote it that way. I had discounted the book earlier, which is probably why I didn't touch it for a year or two, other than all the other stuff happening in that time. I think I was also like, well, yeah, this book may not be that important. It was actually a really good book, so spoiler alert, I really liked it. So I further write that, some family things happen, and then now that things have evened up, I picked up the book after many months of not reading. So I was also like not reading regularly as I had been before, up until the time when I picked up this book, which is sort of that April-May time frame, March-April time. Anyway, so I picked up the book because I thought this would be an easy book to start. So that's usually a way how I will kind of fool my brain into starting to read, is I pick up something easy. And this book was easy to read, don't get me wrong, it's not a hard book to read. It's just that I thought it was a little too simplistic. But I thought it's here, I have it, let's just pick it up and get it going, get the wheels moving, right? I get the mental gears moving. I was wrong about it being simplistic, and I was wrong about it providing some easy fixes. It does not do that. I further wrote that I like how easy it would be for someone truly distracted to absorb this book and get help, have a fighting chance to claw their attention and mental peace back. I applaud Nir Eyal and Julie Lee for setting aside any pretense of fancy language and serpentine rambling sentences like many academics sometimes are prone to do. So I've read, of all the books I've read, some are written by academics, and the material is fantastic. They're just so hard to read because they're not always fantastic writers. There's many academics who are, there's a lot there aren't, and those are very hard to read, those books. They're not written in a way that anybody can just kind of be, it's not approachable, I guess. It is not written in plain English. There's a lot of long winding sentences, and they did not do this here, so I was very, very pleased with that. I found the structure of the book very easy to understand and come back to, almost like a reference book. So just the way it is written with the bullet points and everything, I really like that it's set up to be a reference book than anything else. They're divided into 4 main sections, which is great: internal triggers, traction, external triggers, and distractions. It's again, there's a level of simplification that is done that is not insulting, right? It is simplified, but I think they've put a lot of care into how they've simplified into those 4 sections. I really, really appreciated that as somebody who's put a lot of thought into what they were thinking and what they were saying. What I did here is I wrote small phrases against each chapter in the index, so if I'm going to use it as a reference book in the future, so I go through maybe another patch of time in my life when I'm distracted and I feel like, hey, you know what, I read that book earlier, that was really good. If I open up the index, which is usually where I start the book, is just get a lay of the land, I can see that there's some phrases that I wrote now of what those chapters meant to me, and I can quickly go to the chapter that meant something, and those are in my own words, right? So that's setting myself up for success when I use this book in the future. One of the things Eyal talked about is making a mundane task fun. So I stumbled upon this in one of my previous videos. I talked about how I do this nighttime routine when my energies are the lowest, and I started doing something fun with colorful inks and my fountain pens, and like underlining what I did during the day and just kind of highlighting things and just having a little bit of fun with it. And he talks about the same thing, so I was like, well, hey, I was doing that, so that felt like a nice validation. Now, as I was reading this, now I have been doing a fair amount of work on my own, personal kind of growth and understanding and insight. Particularly, I've been doing what is called self-inquiry journaling, and I obviously am as you can see, I journal a lot, as you can see from some of my videos too. I've been doing a lot of self-inquiry journaling, which has provided insight to my internal triggers, which is one of the triggers that the book talks about and shows you a variety of ways to do that. So the book has a lot of ways if you don't have some of those yourself, but I felt like I was kind of ahead there on that. The next section is about traction, and I've been doing a fair amount of those things also. So I've been doing some time block planning from the Cal Newport era, and I've modified it since to make it work for me, and I've been going to a co-working space to get away from my home office, to just have a change in venue. Sometimes that really kickstarts my creativity and focus. And then I also do a regular amount of reflections in my bullet journals, weekly, monthly, and so on. So those are really good to keep traction on, so you can keep your internal triggers away. So it's a sort of a multi-layered process. You address your internal triggers, and then you build traction to keep them in place, and then you address your external triggers next. I won't talk about everything the book says, obviously, because I don't want to give a lot of the book away. And like I said, there's a lot of value in you reading the book and you finding your own understanding with it. But I'll quickly mention a couple topics here that are towards, throughout sprinkled around the book that just stood out to me, and that's really what I ended up writing about. And I'll just talk about those, but by no means are these a complete review of the book. So one thing that I was really, it really stood out to me, really created an impression, is the idea of identity. I wrote that I'm particularly drawn to the idea of creating an identity instead of setting intentions or goals. So instead of saying, actually I was talking to my fitness coach, and I hadn't gone to the gym in 2 months because I was busy with other stuff happening in my life. And my coach Andrew said, we are people who take fitness seriously. So he stated it like an identity, as opposed to, hey, you need to come to the gym 3 days a week, which is a goal or like an action, right, or intention. This is an identity. We are people who take fitness seriously. So that statement of calling it as like stating it like it was an identity really latched onto me. I was like, yeah, that is who I am. I do take my fitness seriously. So instead of saying I go to the gym 3 days a week. So here's some other identities that I wrote down as I was reflecting on this. I am an avid reader and journaler. I am a person who takes fitness and health seriously, as I mentioned. I am an attentive and flexible-minded person. So this is more of an aspiration, who I want to be, because we're all fighting the fight about getting our attention back and being more flexible-minded and not being so rigid and fixed. So I am now stating what is otherwise would have been a goal or an intention, but I'm stating it as an identity, that I am an attentive and flexible-minded person, and that's who I will be. So anyway, that was a really nice way to kind of rephrase it, and that just, the way you just change words sometimes has a lot of really good impact, I think. So this was one of those that really stood out for me. The other is psychological safety. I feel like I've come upon that topic in the past. Now, I think this piece came up in the section about external triggers or distractions, where a lot of people have a lot of distractions in their offices and organizations, and that is often triggers when somebody has lack of psychological safety in their office, meaning they feel like they might get scolded for something something that was minor, or they might get ignored, or things like that. So that really came out to me because I work for a very good organization, but you never know when the culture of an organization slowly changes. So just something for me to keep in mind, because that is the idea of psychological safety can create a lot of frustrations, and frustrations can then chip away at the work you've done to keep your internal external triggers at bay, right? So it takes the traction off and you start spinning, and that's when at least that's when I end up like coping with distracting things. So that's something that I would that just stood out to me. And then all right, and then I'll come to the last thing here in the book that really stood out, which is the concept of phubbing. Phubbing meaning the snubbing, but with a phone. I'm sure this has happened to you. It's happened to all of us. This is where I disagree a little bit with the author's approach, because I feel like the approach is a bit of a sledgehammer, and I'll tell you why. So the authors encourage calling out your friends and family when they phub you, by saying that, so like if you're talking to somebody and then they just pull out their phone and start browsing or scrolling or whatever, what they're recommending, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that, hey, is that important? Is there a crisis you need to handle? And what I find that to be is a little bit passive aggressive, because I'm kind of calling out like, hey, you might have a crisis. Again, it probably depends on the tone a lot. I'm reading it in a book, so maybe the tone is not as apparent, but I'm taking it as maybe there's more of me in the tone here, but it has to be said in a very very nice way, in a gentle, kind way, with an open mind, for this to work. Otherwise, it can sound very passive aggressive. And it also so that's the first issue I have with the way they ask you to address when you get phubbed by your friends. The other issue I kind of have is I don't think this opens up the topic for a conversation. I think it is more of a stopper than an opener, meaning that if you said that to a friend who was phubbing you on the phone, they would feel guilty and put it away, and then they would be acting on that guilt when they're around you, likely, because you haven't addressed why that is important for you to, you're assuming that is already said and understood, that here's why phubbing is not a good idea. And that is my second issue with the way the approach is. I think there's a more calibrated approach here that I have come upon. So there's a modality called radically open dialectical behavior therapy, and in that has a bunch of skills that they teach in improving your interpersonal communication. One of them is a PROVE skill, PROVE, PROVE. I am not an expert in this, by the way, so if you want to learn more about it, find somebody who practices RODBT and ask them about it. But there's some videos on YouTube as well of some therapists talking about this. But the PROVE skill is basically PROVE is an acronym, and here's how it works. So the first thing is a P, which is provide a brief description. And in this case, it would be, hey, I notice you keep checking your phone frequently in the last hour. Right, so you're not just doing that as soon as they pull the phone out. You're doing that as you notice there's been a bit of a trend. So there's a lot you're doing before you even start using the skill, which is that you're keeping your judgments and your resentments aside and your bitterness aside when that happens, because that often triggers some bitterness in me, I'll be honest, when somebody just pulls their phone out when you're trying to have a conversation with them. So you have to put that aside for a minute, let them kind of go through it, because they might just be having a crisis and they'll be finished with it and you don't have to make them feel guilty. But if it's happening for some time, hey, I notice you keep checking, so just provide a brief description, right? Second is R, for reveal emotions. And in this, there's a kind of a clunky verbiage, but I've kind of grown to like it, which is saying, I am aware of feeling unimportant, imagining you would rather be doing something else, right? So you're kind of saying this in one long kind of paragraph basically, but you're saying, hey, I notice you keep checking your phone frequently in the last hour. P, reveal emotions. I'm aware of feeling unimportant, imagining you might be doing something else. So you're revealing your emotion. And then PRO is going to be others' needs, right? You're going to acknowledge them. So that's the O is others. I understand work texts are hard to ignore. They might say, oh, this is something from work or whatever. Like, I understand work texts are hard to ignore. I understand texting and social media are an important part in maintaining our social, circles. So you're showing some understanding there as well. Now, while you're doing this, you're using the last two letters of the acronym, which is V and E. V is valued goals. What is a valued goal? For me, it is being empathetic and kind. So I want to do this with empathy and kindness. Also understanding. So I'm asking for understanding. And then E is if they continue repeating, that's when you go back to the E, which is should I repeat my, hey, I talked about this, I notice you keep checking your phone, I'm aware of feeling unimportant, imagining you have something better to do, I understand work can be important, but do you mind putting it away? You can make those, you can repeat that request with the E, which is really inquiry, but if they keep doing that, you're basically having to do some self-inquiry on, hey, how important is the relationship for me? Why is just pulling the phone out tick me off? They do put it back away. Am I... my belief may not be there. So yeah, my belief that the only way to have a good conversation is when our phones are away. That may be a rigid belief on my own. They may not share that belief. I may feel some desire to defend or attack, and then I identify, if I'm being still being in a fixed mind. So those are all things you can, slowly evaluate. So I found this is obviously a longer approach and maybe not something the authors can just put in a book at the back of the book when they're talking about phubbing, but I find like that is a much more grounded and more open approach where you get to learn about both sides than simply just stating that, hey, are you having a crisis? Put your phone away. And that's why I took it. So that's it. That's everything that kind of jumped out to me that I decided to journal about, that I wrote down here. I think this book was great. It's fairly short. It's a very quick read. Like I said, it's very readable. It's very easy to read. I definitely recommend it. It's a good place to start as any, and then find where your holes are, and then kind of try to dive into more of how to address those. But absolutely worth reading. With that, I'll end this here. There may be a Substack post that I put along with this video when it comes out. So check out my Substack if you're not subscribed to it already. But other than that, if you read the book, tell me in the comments what you thought of it. What was the one topic from the book that you really liked? I'd love to hear.